Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Stacy King. I am the Director of Communications and Digital Content here for Agentero, and I am really excited to welcome our special guest, Carey Wallace. Carey is a good friend of mine. We've been working together for a number of years doing several different projects. And Carey is passionate about helping independent insurance agents understand how to leverage data in making informed decisions within their agency, how to get insights that can uncover what you really need to be informed about with your agency, what your value is as an agency. And so today's presentation is M&A Marketplace Changes and Your Agency, brought to you by my very good friend, Carey Wallace. And Carey, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Stacy. I think if anybody's paying attention to headlines, we know that M&A in our marketplace is at an all-time high. So hopefully today you can get some insights on what exactly is happening in the marketplace. If you're an agency owner or someone inside an agency, what should you be thinking about when it comes to your agency? And how did those headlines actually apply to your agency when you're thinking about mergers and acquisitions? The reality is every single person in an agency at some point will transition out, whether they want to or not. I mean, it's really that simple. You're either going to retire, you could stay until you don't work any further, but every single person will eventually leave an agency. And we're seeing record numbers of mergers and acquisitions occurring in our industry. This is a trend line that shows the number of independent insurance agencies since the year 1996 to 2020. And so if you were thinking about, okay, we've had record M&A where agents are buying each other, they're transitioning to the next owner, or they're being bought by private equity, you would think that the number of independent agencies are declining severely. But the reality is, over the past 8 years, the number of independent agents have declined only 6.4%. And the reason for that is when there's M&A, there are new agencies being formed all the time as a result of either people deciding that they don't want to work in a large organization. There's people entering the industry all the time to start new agencies. So I then actually reached out to the Big I and asked them for the first agency study that they did in order to say what's actually happened to the agency distribution by size as a result of M&A over time. So this is actually for the last 20 years, from the year 2000 to the year 2020, we actually had 42,000 independent insurance agencies, and now it's right around 36,000. In that 20 years, the decline is 14%, but you can see the smallest agency, which is under $500,000 in revenue, has grown. The middle section has shrunk, which is 500 to $1 million or 500 to 750,000. And you can see the top agencies, the jumbo, the large, and the medium have actually remained the same. So the medium, large are the ones that have changed. Our small to medium, and medium large are the numbers that are actually changing the most. The middle is shrinking. The new agencies are getting larger in numbers, and the small are actually staying the same in numbers. So just interesting to think about that, because when you read the headlines, it's easy to think that there's massive changes, but the agency system, independent insurance agency system, is actually very healthy because we have new agencies starting all the time. So in the same agency universe study, and this is a study from 2020, there will be a new study that'll be published this year, but they ask of those agencies that completed the survey, how many of those agencies believe that they will transition ownership of at least 20% in the next 2 years? So this means in 21 and 22, are you expecting to transition ownership? 31% of agencies, regardless of size, said that they were looking to transition ownership, and that translates to 11,160 agencies believe that they will transition ownership of at least 20% of their ownership in those 2 years. That means there's a lot of transactions happening. And the point is, what's happening in those transactions? What are the multiples? What's driving the value of your agency? And what should you be thinking about if you're one of those people that's thinking about transitioning at least 20% of the ownership of the agency? Some demographics, just to give you a frame of reference. The weighted average shareholder age is 56.4 at this point. 89% of agencies report that they have no written plan for the future of their agency. They do not have a documented way in which they planned to transition their ownership. The majority of the agencies that I engage with do not know the value of their agency. They've never had a valuation done on their agencies. And about 78% of the agencies are owned by baby boomers. The majority is owned by baby boomers, which their ages range from 58 to 76 right now, which means in 7 years, all baby boomers will be 65 or older, which tells you, again, this number isn't going to decline. It's actually going to increase as people move into retirement. The Agency Universe study also asked, what if you had your ideal situation, how would you transition the ownership of your agency? 79% answered that they would prefer to transition the ownership of their agency internally, which means they would either sell their shares to a current shareholder, a next generation, someone possibly in their family, or someone who currently works inside the agency. Whether or not an internal transition can happen or not depends on time, price, and mechanism. So if you wait too long, you actually minimize your options with the options that you can have in order to transition ownership. An external transition would include another agency owner buying your agency. We call that a synergistic buyer, which means two agencies coming together. There are synergies, which would allow you to maximize the profit of the combined entity, therefore having a higher multiple, which could be in the form of an agency or possibly a broker. And then there are also private equity backed entities that are buying agencies, obviously. Again, typically an external sale commands a much higher price than an internal, again, because of those synergies and because of the different mechanisms that can be utilized for an external sale. So, you know, I always like to drive this home because I think that we overlook what the risks are in our own business. We mitigate, as insurance agencies, we mitigate our clients' risk, but we don't think about our own business's risk. And the largest risk inside an independent insurance agency is a single owner past the age of retirement with no plan. That is the most likely situation where an agency will be sold at a discount. So single agency owner past retirement with no plan, which means it's leaving it up to a quick plan that has to be put together and what's called a fire sale, something that has to be done quickly in order to protect that agency. So this is a study that's done by Optus Partners, and it basically says what is happening with the announced deals or announced mergers and acquisitions that are occurring in our industry. And you can see clearly since the year 2013, every single year we've had an increase in the number of announced deals. But what's interesting is 2019, which is COVID, the first 2 quarters, there was a decline, but we ended the year still ahead of 2018. And then there was a 22% increase from 2019 to 2020 and a 30% increase from 2020 to 21. The reason for that is many people who were delaying making a decision decided now might be the best time to sell their agency for many factors. Number one, COVID required us to innovate, and those that did not want to invest in technology, systems, processes, and, going digital may have decided now's the time. I don't want to go through that process. Money was cheap, which means it was, you could command a higher price, and the multiples were at an all-time high. And again, it made it more and more difficult to continue to operate your agency without innovating. And starting in 2019, and clearly those agencies that had technology in place, had processes and systems, people could work remote, were poised to actually grow and flourish during that time, and others actually struggled during that time. It is important to note, these are the headlines that agencies typically see, and they make up less than 10% of the transactions that happen. If you recall, we said 31% said that they were going to transition, which is 11,130 some agencies. This is only showing 1,036. So this really only makes up about 10% of the transactions. If all of those people actually transition ownership, it really is a fraction. So when you read those headlines, just know that you're only talking about roughly 10% of the agencies. When you think about those multiples that are published or those deals that someone tells you about, there are plenty of transactions that occur that the multiples are not published. The mechanism and the types of transactions that are there are never, ever published anywhere for you to know what those trends are. The top acquirers, I put this out here because I think everyone knows who the private equity backed or public entities are that are buying agencies. These are what's in the news, but it's important to note that there are new buyers. There are new entities that are in and buying agencies, and they have different structures. They have different makeups. They're not all one size fits all. So it used to be 5 years ago, it used to be you had to have a $5 million agency for private equity to be even considered looking at your agency. There are plenty of these buyers that they've changed what they're looking for. They're looking for a behavior. They're looking for younger owners that want to grow with them and to become part of their entity, where you can actually sell part of your agency now, possibly sell the remainder later, or you can sell all of your agency now, be part of their bigger whole, have stock, and actually have a second exit from that entity. So it is not a one size fits all, and there are a lot of new players in the space that actually may not be just driven by volume. So PCF is a perfect example. In 2018, they only published that they had done 4 deals. Again, 2019, 4 deals. They became the second largest purchaser in 2021 with 99 deals. Same thing, you can see that there's a new Patriot Growth Insurance Services. They didn't exist, or they didn't report any deals in 2018, and they're now on the top 10 list at a total of 31 deals. So again, just as you're thinking about the options, again, they're looking for agencies that are running their businesses like a business. They're growing profitably. And many of these are looking for agency owners that want to continue to grow with the scale and be able to have what's called 2 bites at the apple, the sale of your own agency, and then also the sale of the stock of the larger entity when you ultimately exit. So these are the multiples that get published. These are 2020 numbers. I should update this. I meant to update this before I did this presentation, but these are the multiples that get thrown around about these larger agencies that are purchased. And sometimes we think that these multiples apply to every agency. Earlier in the presentation, I showed you the stratification of where agencies are by size. 82.3% of all agencies are 1.25 million or smaller. So for a platform agency here, we're talking about an agency that's somewhere around 5 million in revenue. So these do not apply to everyone. The point of this is the dark blue line in the bottom represents the base purchase price that could be paid in stock or cash, some portion in cash, some portion in stock. The red and the yellow represent an earnout. So if an agent stays on with their agency for a period of time and continues to produce based on their benchmarks or their goals that are set for new business and retention, they can do a realistic earnout, which is the red, and added payment over that period of time, or the maximum earnout, which represents the yellow. So when someone says, I sold my agency for 14 times EBITDA, you should think, no one asks, what was your base price? What was the earnout? What were the terms? And did you actually hit those? What you'll only ever hear is, I sold my agency for a potential 14 times EBITDA. That is really, I would caution everyone to ask what the details are and think about how this might apply to your situation and whether or not you'd want to continue to work for a separate entity for 3 years in order to also hit those same kind of benchmarks in new business and retention. These are the multiples that I went to banks that lend to agencies that are buying agencies. So remember those published multiples, there are some private equity backed numbers that can offer stock and offer a cash, and those mechanisms cause them to be able to offer a much different price for agencies. But for a bank, an agency transaction is required to cash flow, which means the loan has to be satisfied by the profitability of the combined entity. So for an agency that's 2 million or less, I went to Live Oak Bank and Westfield Bank and asked them, on average, what are agencies selling for if there's a bank loan involved? So agencies that are 2 million or less, the EBITDA, the multiple that's applied to your profitability of your agency, is somewhere between 6.5 and 8 times EBITDA. If you're over 2 million, that multiple is somewhere between 7.25 and 9.5. And remember, these are transactions. They could be internal, but most likely are one agency buying another, and the profitability of that combined entity has to cover the bank loan, so the bank guarantees that they're going to be paid. Super important to remember that. And when you're comparing agency buying agency or an agency transaction internally, some of those synergies go away, and that price again and that multiple have to be much lower for an internal transaction that doesn't have those synergies and that high profitability. It is important to note they both start at a 6.5 times EBITDA when no external valuation is provided. So they do their own analysis and project what this profitability can be, and they'll start at a 6.5 times EBITDA as a bank. Again, they want to make sure that that loan stays solvent. So these are the types of transactions and something to think about with each type of transaction. While there are plenty of benefits to transacting, doing an internal transaction. Number one is the culture stays the same. The experience for the customer stays the same. The carriers are familiar with the players. So there's great consistency typically when there is an internal transaction. The problem is there is limited profitability, and sometimes it's not done and planned out long enough. In some cases, there could be a talent gap. Just because you're related to someone doesn't necessarily mean that you are best positioned to run an agency. So those are some of the things to think about. And typically, I think we've hit this a couple of times already, though, but typically with an internal transaction, the price tends to be lower. There could be an owner finance note that would allow that payment to be over a longer period of time. When you do that, you actually could impede the ability to invest in the agency and continue to perform in order to satisfy that loan that could be over many years. Again, it could cause that agency's performance to decline, and about 40% of internal transactions don't cash flow, which means you have to renegotiate the terms for that reason. The second type is external. Again, you can combine the profit. There are synergies and some scale is created as well. In some cases, you also have maximized contingencies with multiple carriers, creating additional profit to be considered. And then private equity deals, there's cash and stock models put together. There's resources that can actually help the agency scale. The terms and the earnouts are very creative based on the type of agencies that they're purchasing. And you are part of a bigger whole. Agents that are targets for private equity typically are running profitable businesses. They're growing and doing it profitably, and they've demonstrated that ability on their own. Therefore, they're super attractive for private equity to bring them in and either fold them into their model or allow them to operate the way they are and continue to do that because it strengthens the whole. So if I'm an agency owner, or, thinking about my transition at some point, I think you have to start with what matters to you the most. I'm giving you a whole bunch of different options and things to think about, but you really have to be honest with yourself about what's most important to you. If continuing your legacy and the name of your agency and having a multi-generation agency is important to you, some of these things I'm talking about with external and private equity are irrelevant. If you're thinking about maximizing your payout, you absolutely should be considering, what can I do to make myself more attractive to private equity? How do I run profitably? How do I drive growth? What do I look like? What is the timing that makes the most sense for me to actually even consider that? If I want to take care of my staff, again, you need to think about and really prioritize what's most important to me as an agency owner. And I think one that gets overlooked the most is the reality of having your entire career as an entrepreneur working for yourself and the reality of eventually working for someone else, especially for the last 3 to 5 years of your career. There are a lot of agencies owners that regret making that decision, or even, thinking about that in reality, what that's like being an employee of someone else in a different culture sometimes can be pretty unbearable. So you have to start with what makes the most sense for you. To give you an idea of the agencies that I look at, I value agencies as part of my consulting that I do. The average size agency that I worked with over the past 18 months, I've worked with about 72 agencies over the past 18 months. The average size is 1.28 million in revenue, but they ranged from 480,000 in revenue to 5.8 million in revenue. The average employees are 8.5 employees. Their growth rate was 5% on average. Best practices is anywhere between 6 and 8, depending on the size of your agency. And the top quartile is anywhere between 15 and 23%. Their EBITDA operating as they are, which EBITDA is profitability with adding back the non-cash things. So when you hear EBITDA, just think profit. EBITDA was 17%. And it was corrected or changed to a pro forma profitability of 32% as part of going through their valuation process. What I mean by that is you take all of the discretionary expenses out, you right size based on their trends and the benchmarks in the industry, and what would a reasonable person operate this agency at to get to what the pro forma profitability is. It's a great exercise to go through. You can find opportunities to reallocate your resources and really maximize your profitability, and in many cases without a huge impact to your agency at all. The multiple averages for the agencies that I worked with were anywhere from 6.9% to 8.5%. Keep in mind, when I value an agency, I'm valuing just that agency as it stands alone. I can't possibly know what the synergies would be with a potential buyer. We're just talking about this agency on its own. The average owner age was 54. Although the ages of the agency owners that I dealt with ranged from 34 to 82, and 82 was a single owner, which is, unfortunate. And 93% of the agents that I dealt with had never had a valuation prior. Why did they come to me to ask for a valuation? I think this is super important. When I started doing this several years ago, people only got valuations when they were looking to sell. Someone's calling them, making an offer, and they wanted to know if the offer was in the same ballpark of what it should be. 48% of the people that come to me in order to engage for evaluation are looking to transition internally. 28% actually think they want to sell. So they're that one that you would think of, they got a valuation because they know they want to sell. 15 are actually doing it just to plan. They want a baseline. They're not sure what their transition is going to look like, but they want to run their business better. And they start by getting a valuation and think about the insights that it gives it. And 9% are valuing their businesses so they can get ready to grow by acquisition. Because part of that process is your agency's strength goes into what you can buy and what that combined profitability will be. So they're actually preparing to grow by acquisition. Getting a fair market value isn't just a number. Actually, the number that I give you is probably the least valuable thing as a result of that process, but getting benchmarks for your agency, understanding your risk factors, and then what you can do with those risk factors in order to minimize them and increase the value of your agency is what's actually more valuable than anything inside your report. So to drive that home a little bit, I'm going to show you and demonstrate what I mean. So if we had a $2 million agency in revenue, and they were operating at a 17% EBITDA, which is the average for the agencies that I see, their profit would be $340,000 a year. That same agency, if we got them by looking at their P&L and right-sizing some of the allocation of their resources, it could be compensation, it could be subscriptions, it could be technology that they're actually not using, it could be where they're allocating money. It could actually be, discretionary, things that they're doing in their community that they wouldn't do if they were trying to maximize their profitability. Not that that's a bad thing to do, but remember, is if you're thinking about like you're selling your business tomorrow, what things would you choose not to do in order to increase that profit? If we got that agency to operate at a 30% EBITDA or profitability, that turns it to $600,000 in EBITDA, or a profit gap of $260,000. We just increased it by 260 by doing that exercise and finding those opportunities. If we minimize the risk by looking at this agency and de-risking it, we put a plan in place, we look at their carrier strategy, we make sure that they have contracts in place for all of their producers. There's 27 different risk factors that we would look at. We make sure that there's depth in some of their customer accounts. No account is more than 5% of the overall book of business, those kinds of things. And we move that multiple from 6 times EBITDA to 8 times EBITDA. That value gap is a difference of $2.76 million. This is why an agency should always get a valuation of their agency far in advance of ever wanting to do something, so you're aware of the things that you can do to maximize that profitability and minimize your risk in order to maximize the value. And this is true whether or not you are transitioning internally or externally. The gap will be different, but even if you're transitioning to the next generation, you want your business to be as healthy as possible. Again, setting them up for success to be able to operate that business profitably and also pay the loan to you. I mean, it behooves you to have that agency operate in the best way possible. So as an agency owner, the biggest thing you can do is really think about how can I maximize that profitability? And EBITDA is really, how do I grow? And then what are all the decisions where I'm allocating that revenue to all the different things that I spend money on inside the agency? Compensation plans, benefits, technology, the use of virtual assistants, the marketing, all of those decisions will then drive to what is the overall profitability of the agency. You can also manage the risk inside your agency. And the other factor that comes into play is what the market factors are. The good news is the market has never, ever been stronger. So that is the strongest thing in here. The other two factors are things that an agency owner can actually impact in order to increase their value. These are some of the metrics that agencies can pay attention to. These are benchmarks that are utilized. The reason there's a range, because it depends on the size of your agency, how much you would allocate your resources to. So for instance, an agency should be allocating somewhere between 41 and 55% of all of their revenue just to payroll. Imagine if you're allocating 60% to payroll, you don't have much left to really allocate to anything else. Therefore, your technology will not be current. You will not be able to market in the same way. And agents that have the allocation appropriate can really outperform you because they're making a different decision on where they're putting their money. Same thing for selling expenses, technology. Agents that have figured out that occupancy, they don't need a brick and mortar. Again, they save that money, they can reallocate it elsewhere and therefore compete in a different way. So here's what I would tell you. These are guidelines. The benchmarks are just guidelines and they are being redefined all the time. Agents that are growing are typically investing in technology. They're investing in technology that creates efficiency inside their agency. They're also investing in the processes that make it very consistent and predictable what's happening inside the agency. They're also utilizing virtual assistants or other kinds of staff. Some are actually using robotics in order to, again, make those repetitive things that occur inside an agency although there's a high investment in order to bring that in, they're actually creating capacity on their current staff where they don't have to hire more. They're just creating capacity because they're changing what that role is. So there's lots of things you can do and think about. If you're an agency future owner or current owner, and you've got plenty of years ahead of you, you should be thinking about how do I bust through and really change my own benchmarks to exceed by making different kinds of investments inside of your agency. Those are the agencies that are acquiring others. Those that are not investing are the ones being acquired. So things to think about as an agency is really what's happening in the marketplace that I'm in and what would that impact? You know, Florida is a great example right now. We have huge weather changes. We also have a lot of changes with the carriers that are there. There's fair number of carriers pulling out or going insolvent in a couple places in the South. That marketplace is far different than a marketplace like Kansas or Ohio. So what's happening in my marketplace and what might I do in writing business elsewhere or thinking about what I can do to de-risk my agency? Growth and profitability absolutely are two of the biggest drivers in an agency. Overall volume is probably a close third, but again, there are some buyers that are just looking for a behavior and the ability to run your business like you're selling it. Areas of concentration in any one account, any one carrier, any one niche, or any one person or like owner, producer, even account manager that manages a large part of your book create risk. If something happened to a carrier and they represented over 50% of your book of business and they no longer had that appetite or they went insolvent, it becomes an opportunity for serious attrition. So areas of concentration absolutely drive the value of your agency because your multiple would be different than those that actually have low concentration or a much more balanced concentration across the agency. An agency's investment in technology, I think I've hit it a couple of times, but it really is a differentiator for those agencies that are making investments there. Staffing alternatives are also making big changes because they're creating efficiencies. They're also creating capacity on staff. Staffing will always be the largest controllable expense inside an agency, but if you can create scale there by using some staffing alternatives, you're better off. An agency that has producer-owned books or no agreements with producers has risk that revenue can leave. Actually, a producer-owned book will not be factored into the value of an agency because it's not yours. And what is the transferability of your book of business? Can your agency operate without you? And what is the likelihood or the probability that it will continue to operate the way that it has in the past without you or without a key person is really important, because that dictates, again, what a potential buyer will pay. If it's all dependent on the owner, or it's all dependent on one producer or relationships that are tied to a person, likelihood is you'll have higher attrition than an agency that actually has a great plan for transferability of their book of business. I think for every agency, the key is stop just focusing on what the price is of the agency and think about what is, which one of these three are most important to you. Is if what's most important to you is transitioning your ownership by the end of the year, you will have to give on the price and the mechanism. If you've got all the time in the world, you can create the mechanism to drive the price that you want. But one, you can't have all three, basically. So these have a direct relationship with each other. So in mechanism, I mean, if you want all your cash up front, your price will be different than someone who wants to be paid over time and you're willing to take part of that risk. So again, these three really work in conjunction with each other in order to meet what makes the most sense for you as an agency owner. The biggest takeaways that I hope you got from this is there has never been a better time to be an independent insurance agency owner. Our marketplace has never been stronger with higher multiples. There is more attention now than ever before for our types of businesses. It's one of the best investments you can make because of the high retention rates and the high predictability of your business. So again, it sounds like people are running from it, but there's a lot of people running to it for that reason. Those people that are running their business like they're selling it tomorrow will be the best positioned to have as many options as possible. Whether you are buying, whether you're growing by acquisition, or whether you're considering transitioning out, it takes time and preparation. If you wait until you're ready, you actually won't be able to have as many options in front of you as those that have actually taken some time, worked on their business, and then positioned themselves to do that. And the best thing you can do is have a defined plan if something unexpected happens to your business. That will ensure that the people who survive you actually are not faced with making decisions that they may not be qualified to do, and really ensure that you get the value of your business out of it. That's what I have for you today, Stacy.
Thank you so much. That was very, very informative. I'm sure that all of our attendees have gotten a lot out of it. And of course, everyone that will be watching this presentation on demand will also get a lot out of it. And Carey, we just thank you for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge and experience with our viewers. So perfect. We will go ahead and wrap it up. And everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you for attending this peer-to-peer training with Agentero.